Do you need a house and a husband? The lonely rancher's question changed her fate. Clara adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag as the small bus trundled along the dusty country road. She watched the endless plains stretch out on either side, golden with early autumn grass swaying gently in the wind. The horizon seemed almost too wide, too empty, and it made her heart tighten in a mix of anticipation and loneliness. She had left her small town behind, the one with familiar streets and familiar faces, in search of something she could not yet name, something that might fill the quiet ache she had carried inside her for years. She was 28, a schoolteacher by profession, but life had taught her that learning and teaching were not enough to prepare anyone for the twists and turns of fate. Her friends had married, some having children, their lives settled into rhythms she could admire but could not share. Relationships had come and gone for her, leaving behind polite memories tinged with disappointment. Clara had tried not to dwell on the failures, but sometimes the silence of her small apartment at night seemed louder than any conversation, louder than any laughter she had once shared. The bus finally slowed, creaking over the uneven ground, and stopped in front of a small, weathered building marked County Transport Office. Clara stepped down carefully, her boots crunching the dry dirt beneath her feet. She stretched, taking a deep breath of the cool, clean air, scented faintly with pine and earth. There was a freedom in this air, different from the city or the small town she had left behind, a freedom she had longed for even without knowing it. She had answered a small advertisement in the local paper, seeking help on a ranch in this remote county. The ad was simple, almost too simple. Ranch help wanted, room provided, call for details. Clara had hesitated at first. She had never worked on a ranch before. Her experience had been limited to teaching children, grading papers, and managing school events. But something about the ad, something about the promise of a new life had spoken to her. And so, here she was, stepping into a world she barely knew. After arranging a ride with the county office, Clara followed the directions carefully, winding along narrow, sun-baked roads lined with wooden fences and scattered farmhouses. The air grew fresher, the wind stronger, carrying the scent of hay and horses. Her thoughts drifted, as they often did, to what awaited her at the ranch. She imagined fields stretching endlessly, barns filled with the scent of wood and animals, and a quiet life where she could work with her hands and see tangible results at the end of each day. By mid-afternoon, she arrived at a gate made of rough-hewn wood, the paint faded and peeling from years of sun and wind. Beyond the gate lay a modest house, painted a soft cream color, with a wide porch that seemed to invite her to sit and rest. A barn stood nearby, sturdy but weathered, and a few horses grazed lazily in the paddock, their tails swishing, their ears flicking at distant sounds. Clara felt a mixture of awe and nervousness. The place was beautiful in its simplicity, but she knew that beauty could hide hard work and long hours. As she approached the house, a man emerged from the barn. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing jeans dusted with earth and a flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves. His hair was dark, streaked with gray, and his face was lined not from worry, but from years spent outdoors, living and working in the sun and wind. His eyes were careful, observing her without immediate judgment, yet there was a quiet intensity in them that made Clara straighten her back, feeling both nervous and intrigued. "Hello," he said, his voice deep but calm. "You must be Clara." "Yes," she replied, her voice steady even as her heart raced. "I'm here about the ranch help." "I'm Henry," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, grounding, and it gave her a strange sense of reassurance. "Welcome to the place. You're a long way from home." Clara nodded, unsure whether to laugh or simply smile. "Yes, I suppose I am." She looked around again, taking in the open fields, the quiet of the land, and the distant hills that rolled gently toward the horizon. There was a peace here, but also a reminder of how isolated she truly was. Henry led her to the house, showing her a small room with a simple bed, a dresser, and a desk by the window. The walls were painted a soft, warm color, and the floorboards creaked gently beneath their feet. "You'll have your own space," he said. "Meals are simple, mostly whatever's fresh from the garden or the animals. The work can be hard, but it's honest, and you'll learn fast if you're willing." Clara felt a flutter of excitement and nerves. She had chosen this path, and yet now that she stood inside the house, the reality of it pressed down on her chest. She nodded. "I'm ready to learn," she said. Henry studied her for a moment, then nodded back. "Good, that's all I ask." The first days were a mix of discovery, exhaustion, and small triumphs. Clara learned to feed the horses, to muck out stalls, and to gather eggs from the hens. Her hands ached in ways she had never known, raw from hard work and new movements, but there was a satisfaction in seeing the results of her labor. The barn smelled of hay, horses, and hard work, a smell that became comforting over time. She learned to read the moods of the animals, to anticipate when a horse would balk, when a cow would wander too far, when a chicken might hide an egg. Henry was patient, teaching without complaint, his instructions clear and precise. He spoke little of himself, but sometimes, in the quiet moments on the porch in the evening, he would glance at the horizon and sigh, a sound filled with memories Clara could only imagine. She respected his privacy, understanding that some sorrows could not be shared lightly. Yet in those small moments, she felt a bond forming, built not on words but on presence and shared work. Evenings were the hardest at first. The quiet of the land pressed in on her, the way it did when the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the fields. Clara would sit on the porch, staring at the fading light, listening to the distant cry of a hawk or the low rumble of cattle settling for the night. She missed conversation, the noise of town life, the laughter and chatter she had taken for granted. But slowly she began to notice the beauty in the silence, the way the stars emerged one by one, the smell of fresh grass and earth, the feeling of wind brushing her hair and cooling her sun-warmed skin. Henry noticed her quiet moments, though he did not comment at first. One evening he brought out a small thermos of coffee and handed it to her without a word. Clara accepted it, surprised, and for a moment they sat in companionable silence, watching the horizon turn from amber to deep purple. That simple act, small as it seemed, spoke volumes. It told her that she was not alone, that trust and kindness could be shared without ceremony or expectation. She began to see Henry in a new light. Not just a man who managed a ranch, but someone who had carried loss and solitude, yet remained steadfast, diligent, and quietly honorable. He did not speak of loneliness, yet Clara sensed it in the lines of his face, the moments he lingered on a memory, the gentle care with which he tended to his land and animals. There was a depth to him that intrigued her, a mystery she wanted to understand, though she knew it would take time. Weeks passed, and Clara became part of the rhythm of the ranch. She woke early, learned the patterns of animals and chores, and found satisfaction in her work. Her muscles grew stronger, her mind sharper, and slowly, the loneliness that had weighed on her for years began to lift. She discovered resilience within herself she had not known, and the quiet beauty of the land became a balm for her restless spirit. Yet, despite the new routines and accomplishments, Clara could not ignore the small, persistent questions in her heart. Was this the life she truly wanted? Could she imagine herself staying in this remote place indefinitely, helping a man she barely knew, creating a home in a land so vast and isolating? The answers were unclear, and the uncertainty both excited and frightened her. One evening, after a long day of work, Clara sat on the porch, brushing a strand of hair from her face as the sun dipped low. Henry joined her, carrying 2 mugs of steaming coffee. He handed one to her without a word, and she smiled, feeling a strange warmth spread through her chest. They sipped quietly, watching the colors of the sunset shift from gold to crimson to violet. Clara realized that this simple life, with its hard work, quiet evenings, and unexpected companionship, might be exactly what she had been searching for. She could not know what the future held, nor could she predict the questions, challenges, and surprises that awaited her on this remote ranch. But for the first time in years, she felt a sense of possibility, of potential, of life opening before her like the endless plains stretching to the horizon. And in that quiet moment, with the wind brushing across the fields and the smell of earth and hay in the air, Clara understood that she had arrived somewhere more than just a ranch. She had arrived at a crossroads, one where decisions made today could shape her tomorrow, and she was ready somehow to face whatever came next. Clara woke to the soft golden light spilling across the room. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and earth, and she felt a quiet anticipation stirring inside her. Another day on the ranch awaited, filled with the routines and challenges she was slowly beginning to love. She stretched and stepped out of the small room, her feet landing on the cool wooden floor, the familiar creak underfoot comforting in its consistency. Henry was already in the barn, his figure moving steadily among the animals. The sound of hooves on straw, the low murmur of cows, and the occasional whinny of a horse filled the air. Clara took a deep breath and followed him, carrying her bucket and gloves, ready for another day of work. She had come to understand that ranch life was not just physical. It required patience, attention, and an almost constant awareness of the needs of animals, the weather, and the land. "Morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. Henry looked up from brushing a horse, his dark eyes catching hers with a slight nod. "Morning," he replied. There was no warmth in his tone, yet not overtly, but it carried acknowledgement, respect, and a subtle acceptance. Clara smiled to herself, realizing that even this small interaction mattered. On the ranch, even tiny gestures were meaningful. The work began with feeding the horses. Clara carefully measured oats into the metal feed troughs, her hands steady but mindful of the animal's movements. She had learned to anticipate when a horse might step forward too quickly, when one might nuzzle her arm, or when another preferred to keep its distance. Henry watched her closely but rarely intervened unless she was about to make a mistake that could hurt herself or the animals. Over time, Clara felt a growing confidence in her abilities. The initial awkwardness she had felt during her first days was gone, replaced by a steady rhythm that made her feel alive in a way her previous life had not. By mid-morning, the chores were done, and the sun hung high in the sky, warming the open fields. Clara wiped her hands on her jeans and followed Henry back to the porch, where a simple breakfast awaited: fresh eggs from the hens, bread he had baked earlier, and strong coffee. They ate mostly in silence, the kind that did not feel uncomfortable but rather companionable. Clara had noticed that Henry rarely spoke about himself unless prompted, and she respected that. She did not push, she simply listened and observed, learning from the quiet moments. After breakfast, Henry suggested they check on the northern pasture. The ride was long, requiring them to traverse uneven ground, jump over small fences, and maneuver through thick grasses. Clara clutched the reins tightly, her knuckles white at first, but soon she relaxed into the motion, trusting the horse beneath her and the steady guidance of Henry beside her. The wind swept through her hair, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth, and she felt a thrill she had not experienced in years. As they reached the northern pasture, Clara marveled at the herd of cattle grazing lazily, their coats gleaming in the sunlight. She had learned to recognize each animal by sight and sound, to anticipate their behavior, and to ensure they were safe and healthy. It was hard work, yes, but it was honest, immediate, and rewarding. Unlike grading papers or checking lesson plans, her actions had instant, tangible consequences. She could see the results of her care and attention, and it made her feel grounded, capable, and alive. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a soft, pale blue, and the work of the day was winding down. Clara and Henry returned to the house, tired but satisfied. Clara washed up and changed into fresh clothes, her hands roughened from labor but steady, her heart filled with a quiet contentment. Henry was already on the porch, a mug of coffee in hand, gazing at the horizon. "You've gotten faster with the chores," he remarked casually as she joined him. There was no praise in his voice, yet Clara felt a flicker of pride. "Thanks," she said softly. "I'm learning." Henry nodded, looking away toward the fields, as if measuring the distance with his eyes rather than words. Clara sensed a pause, a shift in the atmosphere, a moment waiting to be filled. That evening after dinner, the two of them sat together on the porch. The sun was setting in a riot of golds and purples, painting the sky in colors that Clara had never noticed in her previous life. Henry sipped his coffee, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Clara watched him silently, trying to read his expression. There was something in his posture, a quiet hesitation, as if he were weighing words carefully before speaking. Finally, he broke the silence. "Clara," he said, his voice measured, deliberate. Do you need a house and a husband?" Clara blinked, startled. The question was unexpected, direct, and somehow intimate. She laughed lightly, thinking he might be joking. "Excuse me?" she asked, half amused, half unsure. Henry did not smile. He took a slow sip of coffee, then set the mug down. "I mean it. I have a house and I work hard to keep it. The land is steady, the animals cared for, but I'm alone. I'm not sure I want to be, and I don't know if someone like you might want the same." Clara felt her heart skip a beat. The simplicity of the words, and yet the weight behind them, took her by surprise. She had expected companionship in the form of conversation, maybe guidance, but never an offer so direct, so honest, so life-changing. She sat quietly, staring at the horizon, trying to process the meaning behind his question. She thought about her life back in town, the loneliness, the failed relationships, the uncertainty of what each day would bring. She thought about her independence, her desire to carve her own path, and yet she could not deny the longing in her heart for stability, for someone who could share her life and her burdens. Henry watched her carefully, his expression unreadable, but there was a faint hope in his eyes, a vulnerability he had rarely shown. Clara realized that this question was more than a simple offer. It was an invitation, a test, a moment of truth for both of them. Clara began, unsure of how to answer. She took a deep breath, letting the evening breeze wash over her. I don't know, she admitted honestly. I've never considered this. I came here for work to find something different, to see if I could manage life somewhere new. But a house and a husband, that's a lot to think about. Henry nodded slowly, not pressing, simply allowing her words to exist in the quiet. I understand, he said finally. You don't have to decide now. I just wanted you to know that it's an option, that's all. The rest of the evening passed in silence, but the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with unspoken possibilities, a tension that was neither uncomfortable nor fearful, but full of potential. Clara found herself thinking about the question repeatedly, turning it over in her mind. She thought about the mornings, the work, the sunsets, the quiet companionship of a man who had lived through loss yet remained steadfast. She thought about her own loneliness and the strange comfort she felt on this land, in this place, with Henry. The next few days, Clara continued her work with renewed energy. She noticed subtle changes in her perception. She observed Henry more closely, learning his habits, his quirks, the way he moved among the animals, the gentle way he spoke to them. She began to appreciate the steadiness of his character, the reliability and care that underpinned every action he took. He did not boast, did not demand attention, did not expect her to fill gaps with empty conversation. Yet his presence was grounding, calming, and strangely comforting. Clara also noticed the way her own feelings were shifting. She felt anticipation in seeing him in the mornings, a quiet desire to share the small triumphs of her day, a subtle longing for his approval and acknowledgement. She was learning to care in ways she had never allowed herself to before, and it frightened her slightly, yet exhilarated her at the same time. One evening, as they sat on the porch again, watching the sun sink below the horizon, Clara finally spoke. Henry, she said softly, about the question you asked, I've been thinking a lot. I don't know if I can answer yet. But I do know that this place and you have made a difference in my life. I feel stronger, more alive, and I want to see where that leads. Henry turned to her, his eyes reflecting the fading light. There was a faint smile, subtle but genuine. That's all I could hope for, he said quietly. From that moment, the dynamic between them began to change. Their interactions became warmer, more personal, filled with quiet humor, shared stories, and small acts of kindness. Clara learned to trust him not only as a rancher and a mentor, but as a companion, someone who had lived through hardship and yet remained open to life. Henry, in turn, allowed himself to show glimpses of vulnerability, moments of reflection, and a quiet hope that perhaps this young woman could be a partner in both work and life. Evenings continued to be their time of connection. They would sit on the porch, sipping coffee, sharing thoughts about the day, the land, and sometimes trivial stories from the past. The silence between them no longer felt heavy. It was companionable, comforting, a space where words were not always needed to convey understanding and respect. Clara began to see the question he had asked not just as an offer, but as a doorway to possibility, to change, and perhaps to love. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. Ranch life demanded constant effort, resilience, and patience. Relationships required honesty, empathy, and compromise. But for the first time in years, Clara felt hope, not fleeting, not uncertain, but quiet and steady, like the wind across the plains she now called home. And so, with each day that passed, she grew more certain that she was exactly where she needed to be, on the threshold of a new life, ready to face the challenges and joys that awaited her, guided by a simple yet profound question. Do you need a house and a husband? The morning air on the ranch had a sharpness that Clara had come to recognize as the beginning of change. It was the first week of October, and the plains were painted with shades of gold and brown, the wind carrying the scent of dry grass and cool earth. Clara stepped outside her small room, her boots crunching softly against the packed dirt. She felt a sense of purpose today, a quiet determination that had begun to grow within her over the past weeks. Since Henry's question had lingered in her mind, she had thought long and hard about her future. The idea of staying on the ranch, of sharing a life with Henry, had shifted from a distant curiosity to a real possibility. She understood that accepting this path meant more than just companionship. It meant hard work, patience, and a willingness to adapt to a life far removed from the one she had known. But for the first time in a long while, Clara felt ready to embrace change. Henry was already at the barn, tending to the horses as the first rays of sun touched the fields. His movements were steady, deliberate, and familiar to Clara now, each motion a testament to years of experience. She carried her bucket and gloves, stepping lightly but confidently, aware of the rhythm of the barn and the temperament of the animals. The horses greeted her with soft whinnies, nudging her hand as she reached out to pat their heads. It was a simple interaction, but one that filled her with warmth and satisfaction. "Morning," she said, her voice carrying a hint of newfound confidence. Henry glanced up, a small smile touching his lips. "Morning, Clara, you're ready early today." "I wanted to get a head start," she replied. "It feels good to begin the day with purpose." He nodded, his eyes softening slightly as he watched her. There was a quiet pride in his gaze, a subtle acknowledgement of her growth. Clara realized that their bond was no longer tentative or uncertain. It had begun to solidify into something steady and reliable, built on trust, shared work, and mutual respect. The day's work was demanding. Clara learned to handle more of the tasks independently, from feeding the animals to checking fences and mending broken boards. Each chore required concentration, care, and sometimes creativity. A cow had wandered too close to the fence, and Clara had to guide it back without startling the herd. She felt a surge of satisfaction as she succeeded, realizing how much she had grown since her arrival. Henry observed her quietly, stepping in only when necessary, his guidance precise but not overbearing. He seemed to take pleasure in watching her learn, seeing her confidence grow with each challenge she met. Their partnership, though unspoken, was becoming a rhythm of its own, work divided, tasks shared, moments of connection found in quiet glances and gestures rather than words. By mid-afternoon, the sun had climbed high, and the work began to shift toward preparation for the coming winter. Clara helped Henry repair sections of fence damaged by recent storms, her hands blistered and aching, but her spirit undeterred. The physical strain was significant, yet she felt a satisfaction unlike anything she had known. She was building something real, tangible, a life she could touch, see, and nurture. During a short break, they sat on the porch, sipping water and watching the cattle graze in the fields. Clara turned to Henry, the words she had rehearsed for days finally forming in her mind. "Henry, I've thought a lot about your question," she began, her voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. I want to stay. I want to help here to be part of this life with you. It won't be easy, I know that, but I'm ready to try." Henry's expression softened, a hint of relief in his eyes. He did not speak immediately, letting the words sink in, letting the weight of the decision rest between them. Finally, he nodded, a small but genuine smile breaking across his face. "Clara, I'm glad. I've hoped you might feel that way, but I didn't want to pressure you. This life isn't for everyone, but I think we can make it work together." The next weeks were a test of endurance, patience, and cooperation. Winter was approaching, and the ranch demanded more attention than ever. Clara learned to stack hay, mend fences under chilly winds, and tend to animals even when the sky threatened rain or snow. Each day was physically exhausting, but Clara found a deep satisfaction in the work. She could feel her body growing stronger, her mind sharper, and her heart more resilient. Henry, too, seemed to soften as their bond grew. He shared small stories about his past, memories of his late wife, tales of the ranch in earlier years, lessons he had learned from hardship. Clara listened carefully, offering empathy, understanding, and sometimes laughter. Their evenings were filled with quiet conversations, shared meals, and moments of genuine companionship. The question that had once loomed large now felt less like a choice and more like the beginning of a shared journey. One evening, a sudden storm swept across the plains. Rain fell in sheets, the wind howled, and lightning streaked across the sky. The animals were restless, and the fences groaned under the pressure of the weather. Clara and Henry worked together to secure the barn, move cattle to safer areas, and ensure that nothing was damaged. The chaos was overwhelming at times, but the cooperation between them was seamless. They communicated without words, anticipating each other's movements, responding to challenges as a team. After the storm passed, they stood together on the porch, dripping wet and exhausted, yet exhilarated by their shared effort. Clara looked at Henry, noticing the dirt and mud on his clothes, the fatigue in his posture, and the quiet pride in his eyes. "We make a good team," she said, a smile breaking through her own weariness. Henry laughed softly, a sound that was rare but warm. "We do," he admitted. "I think this partnership is going to carry us through whatever comes next." The following weeks brought other challenges. A few cows fell ill, requiring extra care and attention. Clara learned to administer medicine, observe symptoms, and care for the animals with a combination of diligence and intuition. She discovered an inner strength she had not realized she possessed, the ability to remain calm under pressure, to act decisively, and to care deeply without hesitation. Henry noticed these qualities, often pausing to watch her work with a faint smile of admiration. Despite the challenges, the bond between Clara and Henry grew stronger. They shared small victories, a fence repaired, a calf born healthy, a storm weathered together, and each success reinforced their connection. Clara found herself looking forward to mornings on the porch with coffee in hand, evenings spent sharing quiet laughter, and the comfort of knowing that she was no longer alone. Their partnership was not without its moments of tension. Differences in opinion about how to handle certain tasks sometimes led to quiet disagreements. Clara, accustomed to her independence and decision-making, had to learn the art of compromise. Henry, used to solitude and routine, had to adjust to sharing responsibilities and considering another perspective. Yet, each disagreement ended with understanding, and each challenge became an opportunity for growth, for the ranch, for the animals, and for their relationship. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, Clara sat on the porch, exhausted but content. Henry joined her, carrying a lantern that cast a warm glow over their small space. "You've done well today," he said softly. "I can't imagine managing all of this without you." Clara smiled, feeling a rush of warmth in her chest. "Thank you, Henry. I feel like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be." Henry's gaze lingered on hers, and for a moment the weight of unspoken words hung in the air. Then he reached out and gently took her hand. Clara felt a shiver of anticipation, a sense of connection that went beyond work, beyond companionship, into something deeper. It was trust, it was affection, it was the beginning of love, quiet, steady, and resilient. The seasons continued to change, and with each passing month, Clara and Henry grew closer. They celebrated small milestones together, like the completion of a difficult repair, the birth of a healthy calf, or the first snowfall of the year. These moments, simple yet profound, reinforced their partnership and deepened their emotional bond. Clara began to envision a future not only on the ranch but with Henry, imagining a life built on shared work, mutual respect, and quiet love. Through it all, Clara discovered a new sense of self. She had come to the ranch seeking purpose, and she had found much more: resilience, confidence, and the capacity to care deeply. She realized that life was not only about ambition or independence. It was about connection, trust, and the willingness to open one's heart to possibility. Henry had not just offered her a house and a partnership. He had shown her a path to a richer, fuller life, one where challenges could be met with courage, and love could flourish in quiet, meaningful ways. By the end of the season, the ranch had transformed under their joint care. Fences were repaired, barns reinforced, and the animals healthy and secure. Clara had learned to navigate the demands of the land, to anticipate challenges, and to care for the creatures that depended on them. But more importantly, she had learned to navigate the complexities of the human heart, her own and Henry's. As winter settled over the plains, Clara sat on the porch one evening, sipping tea, the stars above twinkling in a clear, dark sky. Henry joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. They sat in silence for a while, the quiet of the land a comforting backdrop to the warmth they shared. Clara felt a profound sense of gratitude, not only for the life she was building, but for the man who had quietly offered her a choice, a chance, and a partnership that had changed everything. She realized that the pivotal moment, the question Henry had asked that first evening, had been more than a simple offer. It had been an invitation to transform her life, to embrace uncertainty with courage, and to discover love and companionship in an unexpected place. And as she looked at Henry, she understood that she had chosen wisely. Together, they could face whatever challenges the future held, fortified by shared work, mutual respect, and the quiet power of trust and love. Winter had settled over the plains, covering the ranch in a soft blanket of snow. The air was crisp and clean, and the early mornings carried a quiet stillness that Clara had grown to love. Frost sparkled on the fields, and the sound of crunching snow under her boots filled the otherwise peaceful silence. Life on the ranch had changed her in ways she could never have imagined. She was stronger, more confident, and at peace with herself in a way that she had never been in her previous life. Henry was already outside, checking on the animals before the sun fully rose. Clara followed him, her scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, her breath forming small clouds in the cold morning air. She moved with ease now, familiar with the routine of the ranch and the rhythm of the land. The work was hard, yes, and sometimes exhausting, but it was rewarding in ways that books, classrooms, and city life had never been. Here, she could see the results of her labor. She could touch them, care for them, and feel proud of them. "Good morning," she called softly, her voice carrying in the cold air. Henry looked up from adjusting a gate and nodded, a smile brushing his lips. "Morning, Clara. Ready for another day?" "I think so," she replied, her cheeks flushed from the cold and the exertion. "Winter work seems harder than summer," Henry chuckled. "It is, but it's also quieter. You learn to notice things, the animals, the land, even yourself. It's a good time to reflect." Clara felt a warmth in her chest at his words. Reflection had become a regular part of her life on the ranch. She thought often about the choices that had brought her here, about the moment when Henry had asked the question that changed everything. "Do you need a house and a husband?" She had laughed at it at first, uncertain of its meaning, and yet that simple question had opened the door to a life she had never dared to imagine. The morning passed quickly with chores. Clara fed the horses, checked on the cattle, and helped Henry repair a section of fence that had been weakened by snow. Their teamwork was seamless, a dance of shared effort and understanding. She noticed how Henry had changed, too. He was less guarded, more willing to share his thoughts and feelings. He laughed more freely and offered guidance in ways that were gentle yet firm. Together, they had learned to navigate not only the work of the ranch, but the subtle currents of trust and companionship. By mid-afternoon, the storm clouds that had threatened to fall over the plains passed, leaving the sky a brilliant, clear blue. Clara and Henry took a moment to sit on the porch, sipping warm tea and watching the cattle graze in the distant fields. The tranquility of the scene reminded Clara of the transformation that had taken place in her life. She had come to the ranch seeking purpose, and she had found more than that. She had found connection, love, and a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. Henry glanced at her, his eyes soft. "You've done well this season, Clara. I don't know what I would have done without you." Clara smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "I've learned so much," she said, "not just about the ranch, but about myself. I didn't know I could handle so much, and yet I feel ready for it, ready for this life." Henry nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. There was a quiet pride in his eyes, one that spoke volumes more than words ever could. He reached over and gently took her hand in his, a gesture that had become increasingly natural between them. It was a touch that carried warmth, reassurance, and unspoken promises. The days that followed continued to teach them patience, resilience, and partnership. Winter storms tested their endurance, challenging them to protect the animals and maintain the ranch. Clara learned to anticipate weather changes, plan ahead, and respond calmly to emergencies. She discovered an inner strength she had never recognized before, a calm determination that carried her through the toughest moments. Henry, too, demonstrated growth. He shared stories of the ranch's past, lessons learned from years of labor, and memories of his late wife. Clara listened with empathy, understanding, and sometimes laughter, helping Henry carry both the burdens and joys of memory. Their relationship deepened not only through shared work, but through emotional support, trust, and mutual respect. One evening, after a particularly long day of clearing snow from the paddocks, they sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple. Clara felt a profound sense of peace. She looked at Henry, seeing not just a man who had once been lonely, but a partner, a companion, and someone who had helped her discover herself. "You know," Clara began softly, "when I first came here, I didn't know what to expect. I was scared, lonely, unsure of who I was. And now," she paused, smiling at the memory of that pivotal question. "Now I feel like I've found a home, not just a house, but a place where I belong, where I'm valued, and where love is possible." Henry squeezed her hand gently. "That's all I could have hoped for," he said. "This life, this ranch, it's not easy, but it's ours, and I'm glad we're in it together." Their bond grew stronger with each passing day. The work on the ranch, though demanding, became a shared rhythm that brought them closer. They celebrated small victories: a calf born healthy, a fence repaired, a storm weathered together. And these moments reinforced not only their partnership, but the sense of life they were building. Clara found herself looking forward to mornings filled with work, afternoons of shared effort, and evenings of quiet reflection with Henry. The community around them also began to notice the change. Neighbors commented on how well they worked together, how the ranch seemed brighter, more organized, and cared for. Clara felt a quiet pride in this acknowledgement. She had arrived as a stranger, unsure of her place, and now she had become an essential part of the life and rhythm of the ranch. Spring approached slowly, melting the snow and bringing new life to the fields. Clara and Henry worked together to plant crops, repair fences, and welcome new animals into their care. The tasks were endless, yet each one offered a sense of accomplishment and shared purpose. Clara marveled at how much she had grown, not just in skill, but in heart. She had learned patience, empathy, and the quiet power of shared effort. Henry, too, showed her the meaning of resilience and dedication. He taught her to read the weather, to notice subtle signs in the animals, and to make decisions that balanced care and practicality. Through his guidance, Clara realized that love was not only about emotion, but also about shared responsibility, trust, and commitment. One evening, as they walked along the edge of the pasture, Clara looked at the horizon, the sky painted with the soft hues of sunset. "Henry," she said, "do you ever think about the future, about what we'll do when the ranch is older, when life changes?" Henry smiled softly. "I think about it sometimes, but I've learned that life doesn't always go as planned. The important thing is to face it together, to adapt, and to find joy in each moment. That's what matters." Clara nodded, feeling a deep sense of understanding. She realized that this was what love meant, not just grand gestures or romantic words, but daily presence, shared effort, and unwavering support. She had found that in Henry and in herself. As the seasons changed and the years passed, Clara and Henry's life on the ranch flourished. They worked side by side, faced challenges together, and celebrated triumphs, both big and small. Clara had grown into a woman who could handle the demands of the land, the complexities of partnership, and the quiet joys of love. Henry had found companionship, trust, and a shared life that eased the solitude he had once known. The ranch itself became a reflection of their combined efforts: healthy animals, well-maintained fields, and a home filled with warmth and care. But more than that, it became a place of love, resilience, and shared dreams. Clara often reflected on the moment when Henry had asked his simple yet profound question. She realized that life's turning points often arrived unexpectedly, disguised as ordinary moments or casual words. That question had been the doorway to a life richer than she could have imagined, a life filled with purpose, love, and belonging. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of deep pink and orange, Clara and Henry sat on the porch together, sipping warm tea. The air was filled with the scent of spring flowers and freshly tilled soil, a reminder of the cycles of life and the work they had shared. Clara rested her head against Henry's shoulder, feeling the steady warmth of his presence. "I never thought life could be like this," she whispered. Henry squeezed her hand gently. "Neither did I," he said, "but here we are and I wouldn't change a thing." Clara smiled, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. She had arrived at the ranch as a stranger, uncertain and alone. She had faced challenges, embraced hard work, and opened her heart to possibility. And in doing so, she had discovered a life of love, purpose, and belonging that she had never thought possible. As the stars emerged in the clear night sky, Clara realized that the question that had once seemed so simple had been the key to her transformation. Life had tested her, guided her, and rewarded her with a path she could call her own. And as she held Henry's hand, feeling the warmth, trust, and love that had grown between them, She knew that they would face the future together, stronger, wiser, and forever connected by the journey that had begun with a single, life-changing question.